Hello. Welcome to those who showed up on time. We're going to give people a couple minutes to dial in. It's usually we start a little bit later, like five after. So thanks.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Just fine. Um, the one thing to note, usually on Meet Echo, there's a bit of a delay. So when you click the button, wait a second or two before start talking, because there's just a delay.
All right.
We do need a minute taker. Oftentimes we stick Richard with this, but we'll see. He's not here yet. So start thinking about volunteering because I'll probably be running the show here. It'll be pretty hard for me to take notes. You'll do it, Rowan? Great. There's actually no. He's just saying hello.
I can take notes.
Great. If you note that there's a button in the upper right, which is a note taking tool, you can take it there as well, and then others can join and try to help.
Oh yeah, we could. Oh, noting tool. I got it.
All right, cool.
Can people hear me?
Yep, Raphael, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks.
Like I said, we'll probably start about 5 after.
We can sit here and complain about Meet Echo until then.
Richard, you're looking a little sleepy there. How you doing?
Oh, I'm waking up. Should probably pour another coffee, but I'm here.
I was waiting for the Meet Echo comment.
It's especially inapt for this group because it's Meet Echo is oriented more toward like Mike Line,
Yeah.
speaking in serial sort of conversations. And this group tends to be a little more conversational.
Yeah, so I mean, we're not going to try to impose the mic line and all that stuff here. So people can feel free to jump in and just kind of use your mute, mute locally as best as possible.
Sean, I assume we are not going to get Paul today because of the conflict with the telechat.
I wouldn't expect him to make it, unfortunately. All right, well, maybe we're close enough to I see that most of the usual suspects are here. That's great. Thank you for coming to the MLS interim meeting in December. This is an official meeting, so I need to show the note well. this would not have much of a problem with this, but a lot of this is about IPR and policy and conduct. IPR, if you know something, you need to submit something. As it turns out, I guess I'm the one person that submitted a third-party IPR statement. We checked actually through the IETF last call process whether anybody thought that the third-party IPR would cause us problems and we'd have to work around it. We didn't get any input on that, and that was okay. So I filled that out in the the write-up that we have to give to the next part of the process, and it's off and running. So I think we're pretty good to go there. The next part is, oh, that's the wrong way. Come on. These are old slides, so don't actually, the whole code of conduct thing. Luckily, this group doesn't have any of these problems. So I'm just throwing it up here for the recording. Basically, we should treat everybody with respect. Try to speak slowly. I feel like that one was aimed at me. You should dispute ideas by using reasoned argument. Use your best engineering judgment. Find the best solution for the whole of the internet. Contribute to the ongoing work, the IETF, and basically do both of these. Here. I guess the kind of plan here was to kind of go through the protocol and architecture document as best we could, as well as the extension document. My understanding is that we should probably start with the protocol document because there was a flurry of activity in the last week and a half or so. And so I guess we'll kind of bounce over there and pass it to Richard to kind of tell me where to go.
Sean, do you want to flip back to that process slide you had and just kind of recap people and where we are?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So this one hasn't really changed all that much. So we're actually like,
well, we
right
moved
about,
to step, yeah.
Hold on. We're right about here.
We're after AD review before last call.
Yeah. So I guess that'll work here. So basically the idea is that, to get through the process, like the working group does its thing, and then to leave the working group, the chairs basically give it a review and kind of like, okay, we're good. And then we pass it off to the area director. And then they're the ones that do a review of it from it's kind of a fresh look in some respects, unless they've been actively involved, and they haven't. And so Paul's given a bunch of comments, I guess, on the architecture draft, but we haven't seen his protocol comments yet, right?
Yeah, that's the reason for the flurry of activity on the protocol document.
Oh, I must have missed those. That's great. So basically the idea is, go ahead. No, I was going to say that basically these are comments you kind of have to deal with because he's the one that personally has to put it in, like press the buttons and make it go forward. So we kind of have to answer, and it's a back and forth. And if any of the major changes, any big changes happen that we think are big enough to go back to the working group, we basically redo a working group last call. And then, so we would like kind of bounce back here to the working group last call. And then there's no real AD review. It just kind of goes into the next step. And so luckily you all being here will help grease the skids, so to speak. If we end up having to do another working group last call, at least we'll kind of have consensus among this group to proceed forward. And then we go off. So they'll do an IETF last call hopefully after this. It's 2 weeks. And then it goes on what's called the ISG review, which is where they put it on the telechat, and then all the other area directors from the other areas will look at the draft. And so they kind of look at it with their particular lens, like transport or the int area, or, that happens. And then a bunch of directorates start looking at it. So like the DNS directorate will look at it for DNS impacts. The security review will happen where another independent person will get to review the draft, and they'll look at it with another set of fresh eyes. And it's just kind of the whole process. So I'm cautiously optimistic that if we get through here and don't have any major changes to either one of the documents, we could maybe get a last call going in the beginning of the new year. With the holiday season coming up, I'm not confident that Paul's going to press the buttons, and like they're not going to like have a working or an IETF last call that ends like in late December and then slap it on the telechat like the first week. That's probably not going to happen. So I'm hoping mid-January. But
I've been back channeling with Paul a little bit, and I'm hopeful that if we can get stuff done like end of this week or early next week, he will go ahead and drop it into last call, since we've got a few weeks left in December. So
That's
my
possible.
hope here was to get most everything sorted on the protocol document at least. Benjamin says we'll need a couple more days on the architecture document, but I think we can probably get the protocol document mostly sorted today. There may be a couple things that need another day or two of discussion. But yeah, I think we can. I'm hopeful we can drop into IETF last call pretty soon here.
Oh, that'd be great. And then, so the deal is after it goes through ISG review, that's where it gets approved. But then it goes into this other process where the RFC editor takes over. And that just depends on how many documents are in front of us and whether we're part of a queue. I think this one actually is standalone and won't be pointing to anything else. And so it just takes like an actual like month and a half, 2 months to actually get a number and pop out the door. So, I mean, I'm hoping if the timeline is right and we actually start at IETF last call, like say next week, before IETF 116, we should be out the door with a number. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. So that'd be great. So, all right. I will bounce back over to the repo. We will drop into the protocol. And let me know where you want to start.
Why don't we start with the PRs?
All right.
And I'm going to work these from the bottom up, I think.
All right.
So the first two here are, so we got a couple here that we're going to consider together. So 751 and 752 go together. So this one adds the epoch in which a leaf was changed to the leaf, and 752 removes unmerged leaves because you can compute the unmerged leaves based on the epochs. You may have seen some mailing list traffic on this yesterday between Teofil and I. Basically, this, it gives you a little bit more rigidity in things. You have some cross-check to make sure the path hash chaining is going correctly, at the cost of a little bit more complexity, and as Joel points out in that comment there, a little bit more information revealed to the DS if the DS is storing the tree. As I said on the mailing list yesterday, I think my inclination here is to just close these, and largely because this can be done in a clean extension, pretty cleanly in an extension. So I think the action I would propose on these is to close these PRs on the base spec and look at doing some work in the extensions documents to add this, because I think this will be helpful for decentralized MLS cases where you need to know, which was the latest updated version of a leaf. But I don't think, it doesn't seem critical for the base spec, and it's a pretty non-trivial change. Now, Teofil, did you want to stand up and say that we really need to do this in the base spec?
Well, obviously, I like this change, but I mean, I can live without it. So I think I'm fine just closing them and do it in an extension.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else have thoughts?
I have a question actually for those who are working on implementing various DS. How likely is it in the current DS implementations that this type of metadata is being tracked anyway by the DS? Because metadata, it's great to minimize, but if that's something that is already being taken, then something to consider here.
Yeah, it depends a little bit. So assuming that you have what I think we are now going to call public messages, formerly known as MLS plaintext, the DS can indeed track that if it wants to. Normally, it's not terribly useful in the sense that the only thing so far that we've been thinking of is that a DS might flag members that haven't done an update in a while and therefore might be a risk. Strictly speaking, that's more of a timestamp than a precise epoch number. So far we have that as observable metadata, and now we essentially persist that metadata. So that's always worse. How bad that is a good question. We discussed that very early on, I think, like around 2019, if I remember correctly, with Benjamin. And so one of the downsides of having that metadata persisted is for an attacker who can look at the public tree, this gives an indication to the attacker what the juiciest target would be to compromise. And the juiciest target is the one with the oldest epoch number, because if you compromise that one, that's where you would have the biggest window of compromise. Other than that, in terms of privacy, I don't think this is particularly sensitive metadata. It just tells you if people have been active at all. In some edge cases, sure, it can be the one bit of metadata that gives you an indication whether or not somebody was active in a certain time window. But yeah, compared to other types of metadata, I don't see that as a huge addition.
So I
So,
agree on all points
Does
on
that
the
answer your question?
metadata. Got a delay. So I agree on all points on the metadata. So just to clarify what you said, does that for the DS that you're working on, are you saying that this type of metadata is not collected per norm without this type of addition to the spec? Like it's not really
Well,
an
probably not
inherent
the
thing
epoch
that we're.
number.
Okay.
If anything, it's going to be a timestamp, because we don't know how often epochs would rotate. They can rotate very quickly in a short amount of time, or it can take days or months, depending on the general group activity and policy. So it's probably less meaningful than timestamps to understand how big a window of compromise is.
I'll give a short version from our perspective, which is that we're assuming plain text, MLS plain text handshakes, and so we could store this information, but we don't, it's not particularly useful. There's a lot of other metadata that we have that is more useful. So we already have basically more useful information that could be used for more attacks than this, because we're using MLS plain text.
I think there is a difference though, because the data that we are now adding is actually signed by the participants. So whatever the DS is collecting is not going to be signed. So I mean, at least he can't convince someone else, right? So there is a subtle difference between this and just DS collecting some metadata. Just wanted to say that. I don't know if that's actually a useful metadata.
I cannot imagine a scenario where the DS would have to convince an attacker. It seems constructive, but technically you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
just for
there's a tiny difference.
Just for completeness, WebEx does not track any of this stuff. We do use unencrypted commits so that the server can help distribute the tree, but we don't keep around any data. So yeah, I think the privacy pluses and minuses here are not huge. I'm a little bit more concerned about the complexity of implementation and the kind of bigness of change at this stage, which I'm inclined to kind of not take on, given that it can be done pretty cleanly in an extension. So unless someone thinks it's really important to have this information, which it doesn't really sound like, I think we should go ahead and close this.
The fact that not all of the DS are collecting this type of information seems to be an argument for that not to be made mandatory.
Yeah.
You took the words right out of my mouth. That's, I think, an excellent point, and the fact that Theophile is, going in the grand spirit of consensus, which is it can be done later and that'll work. Let's go ahead and go with that. So thanks. So Richard, I'll let you take care of closing the stuff out. All right.
Okay. Yeah, I can push the button. Sure. Raphael, note that this is one more for the extensions document. All right. I think the next one is 754. So I forget who raised this issue. Someone noted that technically you don't really need to send, so the spec before says when you make a commit, you make one commit message and one welcome message that goes to all of the new joiners. And technically that doesn't need to be the case. You could make anywhere between 1 and n welcome messages, where n is the number of new joiners. I guess you can make more, but that wouldn't be very useful. This PR just encodes that and basically changes all the instances where it says make a single welcome message to say make as many welcome messages as you want, as long as you cover all the new joiners.
I think it's a useful addition. The only thing I was wondering about was in the motivation for it. The keyword mentioned that for larger groups, welcomes can be hundreds of kilobytes. And I was wondering how large exactly those groups are, because it seemed fairly large for a welcome, unless you go to the hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of members. But I didn't properly calculate it, so I might also be wrong.
Oh, actually, just to give you some like real world numbers, we run MLS groups pretty regularly in WebEx of hundreds of members. And because we have certificates in the tree, they get very large very quickly.
Okay, yes, but this change is not about the tree. I mean, the tree is optional anyway. This is this is quite different.
That's true. Yeah, if you were right, if you were distributing the tree in the welcome message, it would get big. But yeah, that's correct. If you have an off-board tree, then it's not clear that a welcome would be super huge. It actually occurred to me that there may be a bit of a privacy motivation for this, in that, we'll skip that thought because I have some further out thoughts on that.
I was the one who raised the issue, and the reason I ran across it was I was running some performance tests on MLS, and I was adding several thousand users to a group at the same time. So that was the size of groups that I was looking at. So it's not necessarily something that might happen in sort of normal use cases, but yeah, it was just something I ran into when I was doing performance testing.
But did you include the tree or not in the welcome?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Because I just want to be specific about that. This distinction here, it doesn't help you if you include the tree in general.
Yeah.
Like, you still have to include the whole tree. So it's strictly about everything else. Yeah. But you still, okay, so several thousand and you had hundreds of kilobytes for a welcome. It seems like intuitively it seems large, but I don't have any counter evidence to offer.
Well, you're going to impose at least a public key and an auth tag worth of overhead for each joiner, and actually you're going to encrypt the path secrets. So let's say you've got 64 bytes or so for each joiner.
We had 314. We had 314 bytes per member.
Yeah, I mean, the path secrets, you only send one per member because the other ones can be derived. So assuming that these secrets and keys are like, say, 32 bytes, and so you have a bunch of them, but less than 10 typically, this is how I don't understand how you get to the hundreds of kilobytes.
So, Richard, if we're throwing up a public key, if we go post-quantum, is this a problem?
Well, I mean, that just amplifies the speed at which these things get big. So if you're using post-quantum public keys, then you'll have bigger welcome messages because you're doing public key encryption. Although you won't have public keys, and you'll have encapsulated keys, and I don't remember how big those get.
Those also grow. So the chem grows, but there's only one chem per participant. But the pass secrets, for example, don't grow bigger in that case. So it's
Right.
literally just for chems. So yeah, it's a linear growth that's proportional to the size of a chem, which typically is going to be, I don't know, hundreds of bytes, probably around a kilobyte. I'm not sure what Kyber does there. That's going to be the one.
It's about 6K per participant for Kyber, if memory serves.
A chem is 6K in Kyber? Okay. Seems large, but you might be right.
I didn't quite understand, why don't you need a chem for the path secrets for the individual nodes? They have public keys in there too, right? That you have to chem to.
Yeah.
Well, in a welcome, you take the path secret and the group info encryption secret, and you chem that to each joiner.
Right.
And so you have a chem output and the encrypted secrets for each joiner.
Right. Fair enough. Fair enough.
And so that's the overhead. But in any case, I mean, do folks, coming back to the PR, like, do you have folks have concerns that, you know, are there reasons we shouldn't kind of allow this splitting up and require one? Because it seems like there's no kind of security reason to or technical reason. It's just providing some more options. I don't think this actually changed the processing of welcome messages. You know, as someone is, you know, a sender of a commit is free to make one just as before. It just adds the option to produce multiple. Interpreting silence as consent.
Yeah, I think we're going to go with that. If people were really going to object, I think they'd be throwing flags. So let's go ahead and get this one merged.
Okay. I'll push the button on that. And I think the next is going to be 755 and 756 together. Franciscus and I believe Brendan both noticed that we talk about basic credentials as if they contain keys, and they no longer do. So I think the right one to merge here is 756. Sean, if you want to scroll to that one. So this just says we no longer have an object called basic credentials, so we just revert that and refer to it by the type in the enum. I don't know if Franciscus is on. No, he's not.
55 is also a good one because it also contains the word basic credential. So if that has vanished completely.
Do we need both 755 and 756?
It looks like it from master. So we got rid of basic credentials altogether, didn't we?
So
I don't think that 755 because
basic in quotes is still in the IANA registry, and so the language in 756 that's still consistent with what's in the document, right? But there are references to basic in the grammar and in the IANA registry. I don't, for 755, the public key material associated with the basic credential, that doesn't make any sense to me if the basic credential doesn't exist as an object.
And a credential of type basic doesn't have any key material associated to it.
Right. So like,
Brendan,
for me, it doesn't make any sense, but.
Brendan, do you have a comment? Rowan, could you mute? Thanks. Sorry, Brendan, I think you were trying to get in?
Yeah, I was just going to say that 755, I don't think that we need it because it's trying to add a binding between the basic credential ID and the signature key, which is not something that we're trying to go for. Like the basic credential is just an assertion of it. It doesn't mean anything.
Agreed. All right, so I'm going to propose we close 755 and merge 756. And last call for objections.
Again?
So 756 just changes the phrase basic credential to basic, in quotes, credential.
So the only note that I had with this was that if the credential, the basic credential essentially just doesn't really contain anything, what does it mean for, like, if the AS validates the credential? Like we assume that the AS somehow validates the binding between the key and whatever else is in the identity, right? So it's pretty meaningless to have AS validation on something where there's nothing, like where the public key is not in there.
So Conrad,
that was very weird.
I think one way of looking at this is if you have, if you had an implementation where there was some type of linkage between the DS and the AS, it would be, you could enforce, to the extent that you can do anything with a basic credential, you could, the AS could ask the DS to, only pass pass something that contained the expected value in the identity string of a basic credential. But I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that important. I mean, I think that what the text in 756 is fine, and it, like, to the extent that we accept that that somebody might use basic credential, I think that it's just, we have put as much text around it as we can for a thing that was designed to be the thing that you use for testing and for sort of, private implementations.
Well, I just think that, I mean, it is in the spec and people are probably going to use it, like, in one way or another in production environments. So because, like, there's no language saying it's not meant for that use, and there's nothing like. Sorry.
As an example.
We lost most of that, Richard.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was just saying, like, if you look at something like Signal, I don't think they have a notion of credentials aside from public keys, and so I could envision them using something like this.
Right, but we say that the credential is the thing that gets validated by the AS. The public key is just in the key package. The key package doesn't get validated by the AS at all.
Yeah. I think you're on the right track, Conrad. I think we might need to clarify this. Yeah, maybe in the kind of credential validation section to make clear. So I think this came a bit, we ended up in this situation because we made this change a little while ago to pull the signature key out of the credential so that you always have it, and you can always process with it. And so maybe what we just need to do is say that the inputs to the AS are both the credential and that signature key. Does that sound right?
Yeah, or that the credential needs to include like a commitment to the signature key.
I mean, ideally, but basic one.
Yeah. Sure.
So
yeah, I can take it as a step at this if that's what we want to go for.
Okay.
Conrad, there's some text for discussing basic credential and why you shouldn't use basic credential if you care in the architecture document that I added.
Ah, I missed that. I'm sorry.
It may be that it may actually be that this is in one of the PRs that has been languishing for the since August here.
Yeah. If I grab basic in the architecture document, nothing comes up. So.
Okay. I'm looking in the PR the PRs that I submitted here.
Anyway, I think there should be some text in the spec that says there should be a commitment to the public key and the credential.
Right. Yeah. So I added 2 paragraphs. I'm going to send it to the chat here if I can find it.
And I'm also looking in the protocol spec. In section 5.3, we say that basic credential doesn't protect the public key, and for X509 credential, we say that they do have to be bound. So there is text in the protocol document that protects that.
We don't have a texts chat in MeetEcho, right? We have to go through
It's on the left. You have to tab. There's a tab next to the participants tab.
Got it. Okay.
So it's like bubbles underneath where you unmute yourself.
That is in poll 118 on architecture. So that was intended to basically tell people not to use basic.
Okay. I mean, I can take a look at the architect document, and Brendan, thank you for the pointer. I'll look at the spec as well again, and then report back in the PR. Does that work, or do we really want to merge it right now?
I think we can go ahead and merge this. I went ahead and filed a new issue as we were talking here to address this clarification. So I think we can finish. We can continue discussing there and file a new PR to address it. All right.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so I'll push those buttons. Next is 757 on the first epoch. Marta, would you like to tee that up?
Oh, yeah, I actually thought it was a small issue, but I see you have a different solution. So this kind of way of the joiner computing the interim transcript hash or the confirmed transcript hash from the interim transcript hash and the confirmation tag in the group info. This doesn't work in the first epoch. So when you want to externally join to the first epoch, this kind of algorithm doesn't make sense because there is no confirmation tag from the old epoch. And currently we say that in the first epoch, the interim hash is empty. And so yeah, one way to do this is to say that, which is what I did here, is to say that in the first epoch, the joiner just takes an empty hash. But yeah, so that's that. I don't know. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think the root cause here is that the transition from 0 to 1 is different from the transition from n to n+1. Is that right?
Well, for the creator, it is not, right?
Well,
so is Marta, are you saying that it should be possible to join the external commit into a completely empty group?
No, it's not an empty group. So I create a group, I issue group info, and someone externally joins the group, creating epoch 2.
Epoch 1, you mean?
Okay, so you end up with 2 members.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I mean,
go ahead.
It's kind of a corner case, and so I don't know if we want to make a big change out of this thing.
Well, what I'm worried about is that we have a potential interop issue if we've got ambiguity around how this first epoch is computed.
I lost that last one.
Yeah, I'm worried we have an interop problem if there's ambiguity about how the first, how epoch 1's epoch secret is computed. right? Because that's going to include the outputs, the same outputs you should go through here, right? Because it's also a commit.
But I think the epoch secret is not ambiguous. Why would it be ambiguous? Why are you saying that?
Well, isn't the epoch secret computed based, including the transcript hash? And so
yeah, so we have to agree on the transcript hash. So this kind of also solves the transcript hash. So we should specify this somehow, right? So that it's not ambiguous. Because so I think some change should be made.
Yeah. So both Marta and Richard proposed a concrete way to do this. We need to pick one and document that. Whichever one we do, we need to document what it is, because currently it's ambiguous.
I think maybe one more problem is kind of that we don't have a description of how a member computes the group info object. I mean, it's listing the fields, but it's not saying how do you actually, like, how do you come up with these fields? So for example, it says there is a transcript hash, but it doesn't say like set it to, or there is a confirmation tag, but there is no instruction, use the confirmation tag from the last commit. And then there is this corner case where there is no last commit. And I guess we would have noticed if we had such a text, maybe.
Yeah, I actually looked at the code that's in my implementation this morning to confirm how did I set that field. And we actually computed on the fly, with the confirmation key for the current epoch and the confirmed transcript hash for the current epoch, which seems like you could specify that behavior. It would match. What a
confirmation key for the. Okay.
Right. So remember, the confirmation tag is just the MAC over the confirmed transcript hash by the confirmation key. And so if you have those two on hand, you can compute the confirmation tag, which is kind of the basis for my suggested resolution here.
You also don't have to, like with your solution, we don't have to really compute the MAC. We could also say that the first confirmed transcript hash is empty. Wouldn't that work as well?
Yeah, I think we should say that in any case. The question is, what is the interim transcript hash that you use here? Is it empty, or is it the empty confirmed transcript hash plus the confirmation tag? And actually, I don't know, maybe we're not ambiguous here, because I think the empty interim transcript hash is just the interim transcript hash before the confirmed that's stated. And I think at least the way my stack interprets things is that the interim transcript hash that you use to initialize epoch 1 is the confirmed transcript hash in the group info plus the confirmation tag in the group info, and that becomes the new term transcript hash. So I mean, if we had that logic, if we agreed on that logic, then there wouldn't be any ambiguity to resolve here.
Well, okay, so we have some concrete text in front of us that Marta wrote that I think everybody agrees that it would work. And the main objection is just that it creates this special case during epoch 0. And then you've kind of, Richard, you've described a few, a way in which you can do this that doesn't have a special case, but has a bunch of assumptions that are not obvious that would need to be specified. So I think we have one concrete and one sort of less concrete proposal on the table. So I would propose that either we go with Marta's text, or if you don't like that, if you write up a concrete PR, and then we take it offline and we go back and we pick one of those two PRs.
I'm not sure that what we have in front of us is actually concrete. Or let me push on some specifics here. So Marta, what do you mean when you say the joiner uses the empty interim transcript hash?
So I was looking at section 11 where groups are created, and it says that when you initialize a group, you always have to do a commit after you initialize it. Does that help if we don't have that epoch 0?
Yeah, that will help. Does it actually say that? I didn't see.
Yeah, it says that you create a group, you have to add people to it. I don't know what happens if you don't add people to it, but after you do that, you construct and send a commit.
I mean, you could also create a group for people to add themselves into. Would that make sense?
Well, yeah, you could create a group, but the text of the spec is that you have to do a commit, and so you are going to go
I
from epoch
didn't.
0 to 1 immediately.
Okay, I didn't notice that text. That would fix it, of course.
Yeah, but that seems a little over the top. Yeah, I think the way that
implementers definitely get confused.
yeah, I think the way Section 12 is written right now, it sounds like it doesn't have a way to create a one-member group. It all seems you always want to create a group with more than one member.
Okay. I mean, that fixes it then, and we can just close it. I missed this text.
Well, so I'm still actually worried about ambiguity here. So Marta, could you maybe clarify what you mean with using the empty transcript interim transcript hash here?
Because the external joiner is recomputing the interim transcript hash that the other people have already in the group. They already are storing something, right? So he has to recompute what they are storing in their state. Now the creator in epoch 0 is storing in his state empty interim transcript hash. And the joiner instead will somehow hash something together to get some hash, and it's not gonna be empty. Right?
I see, yeah. I think that's right. So in that case, it seems like actually we should, so in addition to this, we should nail down the confirmation tag contents in epoch 0. It seems like that field should not be there because it's no use.
Yeah, or empty or something. Like
yeah.
Now it's kind of it shouldn't be used. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, we can also say that the group info object does not exist for epoch 0 because you must create a commit or something like that. But it's a bit, I don't know.
As a side note, I don't have any particular opinion on either approach, but instead of using zeros, maybe we can use a random value. That would make me feel better in terms of reproducibility of the group. Would that work?
0 for what?
Does it make any sense? For the like an empty, you're just using an empty transcript hash.
Oh, I think by empty we mean
hash.
0 length, not 0 value.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Which kind of like it's a constant either way.
Yeah.
So I feel better with a random value, but
why?
It just differentiates groups more when they get created. You have one less chance of ending up with two groups that look the same when they get started. Like we have the similar. Sorry.
I guess you would anyway generate the group ID at random, right?
That's true. That's true. An honest client would do that. Yeah. Maybe it's just yeah. Should be okay. That's fine.
Yeah, and there is a fresh init secret that is generated. So I kind of like the property that the randomness for the group comes from the fresh init secret, and that distinguishes it. We don't have to. We don't have like 16 sources of randomness trying to separate the group. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That makes total sense. Yeah.
Okay, so I think I'm coming around to this solution, but I think we should probably file an issue for what Brendan pointed out in terms of making clear that you can create a one-member group and not add anybody.
Okay, so to summarize, it's possible to create a single member group and issue group info, and people can join externally. I mean, I don't see why not, to be honest. Yeah, we clarified that the confirmation tag in the first group info is empty because there was no confirmation tag before. And with this one, I think we still need to special case somehow because, well, okay, to fix, another fix for this is for the first interim transcript hash to be actually the hash of an empty confirmed transcript hash and an empty confirmation tag. We can also fix it like this.
Yeah, I actually like that a little bit better.
I think it aligns more with. Okay, yeah, I can change it to be like that. It's also a concrete solution, so I think we should be good with that.
Yeah, and that'll be a fixed value, so I would just put that value in hex in the spec. Oh, actually, no, never mind. It'll depend on the cipher suite.
No, wait, it depends on the hash.
Yeah. So. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That seems a little bit more uniform to me.
Okay. Yep.
Can I write down that, Richard, you will review after the change and merge?
Yeah, that sounds right. So let me put this comment in the pull request.
Right, thanks.
It is the 8th of December. So what I'm writing here is that epoch 0 group info has an empty confirmation tag, and then the initial interim transcript hash must be the empty confirmed transcript hash plus the empty confirmation tag. And then I will file an issue.
Sorry, can you repeat that? It's now the empty confirmed transcript hash and the MAC over the
tag. It's the hash of empty tag and empty confirmed hash.
Okay, and then we'll file an issue to update section 12 to make clear that we can have one member groups. All right, I think we've got a good path on that. So Marta, just I'll keep an eye out for your changes.
Sure.
All right, thanks. Next, I think these are just a bunch of nits from Paul's review. Brendan already approved these, so you can probably just
quickly looked at these. These are all fixes that are pretty minor. So unless anybody's got any like objection to where we put the commas, we should just go ahead and merge this.
Oh, I think the one thing that might be of small interest is that very first change there. This is not a technical change, but it's a change in how we describe things. So before we referred to this sec-g thing, like everybody agrees that like the way you express an uncompressed curve point is a 0-4 octet followed by the x coordinate followed by the y coordinate. That's pretty uniform across everywhere. The question is how you say that. So before we said it by reference to this sec-g non-IETF kind of random group of vendors that got together spec. Paul flagged that, and I went over and looked at the TLS spec 8446. and realized they had defined their own description of this. So TLS has a description that basically is a TLS struct that says 04 octet X coordinate, Y coordinate. And so I think we can just borrow that and use it here. So it's not changing what goes on the wire, but just changing how we describe it. But if anyone was really wedded to this SecG reference, we could consider keeping it.
I actually missed that in my review, and I'm completely with Paul. We shouldn't point to that spec if we can get away with it. We should just let it wither on the vine and die.
Okay, great. Right, yeah, I think that's the only thing of any substance in here. So I updated the version field here. I think Raphael may have suggested, or Rowan may have suggested upgrading a couple of other ones.
Yeah, that was me. So actually, there's a good reason, starting with this one, to do that, because this would allow folks to use derived protocols from MLS that are somewhat similar, but not entirely, and give them a unique number so that there is no collision whatsoever. It's also interesting what you mentioned, Richard, to do this grease thing, which seems to be good practice. So that's a way to prepare that. And yeah, for consistency, I would propose to do the other ones as well, because, well, the same logic applies to them. And specifically for the content type, we already introduced a new one in one of the extensions now, and it might very well be the case that you want to introduce more, and then 8 bits seems a little bit small if you want to avoid collisions. Given that this is not something IANA related, like it's not going to be in any registry. So I know we want to keep the wire format as small as possible, but I think it's tolerable if we also make, I think it was content type and wire format. Don't remember what I commented, but yeah.
Rowan, I see you made a comment on the PR. Do you want to bring that to the mic?
I just think this is solving another problem. But if the consensus is that we want to go bigger, that's fine. But
I mean, I guess the question is if they have to be called MLS, right? Because right now everywhere it also has. Don't we also include MLS, the string in the wire format?
We included in a bunch of the Macs for domain separation. KDX. Yeah. But that's a string. Will get updated with the versions, and it doesn't go on the wire.
And sorry, and this really only makes sense if everyone then like agrees somehow that everyone gets different protocol version numbers for different variants of MLS, and how does that come to pass? It's a bit unclear to me.
Yeah, I mean, this would be like for a completely proprietary rollout of MLS, for example. And we discussed that previously, you know, for rollouts that are pre-RFC that might want to have a different version number so that you can upgrade. Okay, maybe this is not going to be such a huge issue anymore now that we're closer to RFC, but stuff like that. But you need full consensus, obviously. I mean, this is not aimed at interop.
Can't we then just similar to the proposals, just kind of wall off a section that's proprietary MLS variants? As you say, you know, the last 18 entries or something are proprietary to be used.
I mean, you can always make an extension to define more if you need to. I'm curious, Britta, do you have any size concerns?
No, Oh, there's a delay. Forgot to wait before talking. I don't have any particular concerns on this. I think we'll be okay on our end.
So I just wanted to say that.
Well, Ron, you said you can make a new extension, but that's not really practical, though, because like literally right now we already do that for targeted messages. We introduce a new, I think, wire format. So assuming we wanted targeted messages, and then we would have to completely lose the compatibility on the wire format itself if we were to introduce a 16-bit identifier there. It does make a big difference in practice.
Yeah, I think you can do extensions for basically everything besides protocol version and maybe wire format. Like if you agree on those two outer containers,
and that's precisely what we're already changing in one of the extensions.
One of the versions reserves the next byte or 2 bytes to be an extended protocol version.
But then you're into variant territory.
Done.
So there is a way to carve up.
But yeah,
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is like, is this something that we think we can live with? And if it is, then maybe we should just merge it. There's ways to carve up the registry in the IANA consideration section to say, this is a huge registry. The first, certain number are reserved for the working group. And then like the last, I don't know, 50 or 64 or whatever is like, private use. You can do whatever you want. I don't know that we need to do that if the idea that was that we're trying to grease, which, the idea people don't know, the idea is that it stop middle boxes from ossifying on a particular number. So it kind of makes them, a little bit more agile. So, but I guess I'm coming to the conclusion, I don't really love this. I don't really think there's ever going to be that many versions, but like, if there's not really a concern about size constraint, let's just do it.
So I would note, by the way, that everything we have an IANA registry for is already 2 bytes. Maybe we should have more things in registries, like maybe the wire formats need to go in a registry. Yeah, we're already 2 bytes for everything that's IANA registerable. But we can do this.
I thought it crossed my mind. I mean, I'd be in favor of it, to be honest. I just thought, that was pushing for even more. And the middle ground would be to have 2 bytes, but not do the IANA dance. But if folks agree, then maybe we should include wire formats into that as well.
If there are already
that's the cleanest way of doing it.
If there are already extensions that increase the amount of wire formats that exist, I think that there definitely should be a registry.
Yeah, I mean, that's the case already. So.
Okay, I'm filing a new issue, create an IANA registry for wire formats. So yeah, I think then my compromise proposal here might be to make wire format and protocol version 2 bytes, because everything else you can handle with an extension, and leave everything else as it is. Does that sound agreeable to folks? Seeing nodding from Rowan.
That was the question of the content type. I'm not sure right now. I can follow up on that later if we need to include that.
But again, with content, with content type, like once you're in a known wire format, you could negotiate an extension that makes that as big as you like.
Mm-hmm. Right, that's true. Yeah, we can leave it out then.
So wait, so we agree that we want the 2 bytes and not the IANA solution for both wire format and protocol version?
I think I would do. I think I would not do IANA for protocol version, but I would do it for wire format.
Okay.
So my notes here are make protocol version in wire format 2 bytes, leave other enums as is, and define an IANA registry for wire format. Okay, I can update and do that.
2 bytes and IANA.
Yes, two bytes and IANA for wire
wire.
format. Yeah. Correct. All right, good. I think we got a resolution there. 822, please. All right. This is just increasing the amount of enter space from 8 bits to 12 bits. I don't think it's making an appreciable dent in the overall space, so it seems obvious. Unless anyone would like to object here. Hearing none.
This a done deal, yeah.
I think it's good.
Okay. I hit the button. It's easy. 823 is a bunch of minor stuff that Paul pointed out. I think it's mostly just editorial clarifications. Changes a couple of uppercase mays, lowercase mays. Links to the AEAD limits. Yeah, that's about it. So I think it's mainly editorial stuff. So, you know, spotting anything in here that causes concern. Okay, I'll consider 823 approved. 824. So we had some discussion on the issue about this. You know, obviously, if you're using things like credentials things like X509 certificates for credentials, they can expire, or I would point out be revoked. In any case, their validity status can change over time. I think Rowan hit on my ideal state in the issue discussion, which is that like the application operationally should arrange for the credentials to be valid at all times, so that if someone joins, they can verify everything. They don't have invalid credentials hanging around. They have to do some error conditions for that. Obviously, that's an ideal, and I don't think you're going to be able to maintain it all the times. But I think the high-level point is that it's the application's job to assure that, and we should point them toward that and recommend how you do it, but not have hard requirements about it. So, added this section to provide that guidance. I'm hoping Tom, looks like Tom and Marta are both on, who were, I think, maybe looking for a harder requirement. I'm hoping they'll comment on whether this makes them feel any better.
So yeah, originally I was looking for a harder requirement, but I think throughout the discussion, I came around to the idea that what you're proposing here actually does make sense in terms of a compromise, because you can just leave it up to the application, and we have already discussed ways of implementing this as an optional thing, and I think that's totally reasonable.
My biggest kind of confusion is the kind of catch-up scenario, if that makes sense. Like I was invited in the group, into a group when I was on vacation, right? I'm joining, I'm validating credentials, and well, they expired, but they were perfectly valid when at the time that the commits were issued. So, I mean, your text is mostly about sending and committing, and in this case, I think this is clear, this is fine, and you should check. And this is all good. The kind of contentious part is like when you're catching up, and we have text right above this text saying that you must validate credentials when there is an ad proposal, but there is an ad proposal that was sent like weeks ago, and it's kind of a mismatch here.
So I mean? Marta, you're talking about processing a queue of messages that you've received.
Yeah, exactly.
But in that case, the commit was valid at the time. It wasn't expired at the time that it was timestamped.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting. It's kind of, you're not really validating a credential. You're validating a credential against a timestamp, but these timestamps don't exist in the RFC right now, and this is like, you should be validating the credential against the timestamp of when the commit was made, if you know it somehow from somewhere.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think we should add some text that says applications should not do expiration or revocation checks when they know they're reading backlogged messages.
Or maybe
they could if they had timestamps, but
exactly,
it's not guaranteed that they have them. That's the problem. Yes.
It's like, maybe I want to, because maybe I trust some sort of DS that to provide timestamps.
I think there's a mention of something like that somewhere else in the document, so that would be consistent. I forget where it is. It might just be when we talk about validating credentials.
I mean, that's right on top. I didn't see that text right on top there.
I would note that we had a similar issue with lifetimes of key packages, where we say you must validate them when you do an add, because you must validate that it's valid right now when you do an add. But you might, but you probably shouldn't when you receive it, because it might have been delayed enough.
Yeah, we have such a text about, and now I'm saying that for credential validation, maybe we should have this same kind of text. Because we don't have such a text for credential validation, right? It's kind of, it's the same situation.
And do you have thoughts on how to resolve that? It's a tough question.
It's a tough question, yeah.
Maybe we should go ahead and merge this and handle that as a follow-on.
Yeah, and I think that it might not need to be solved here, because if we're saying that the application can do whatever it wants, then if the application has the timestamps available, that's something that it can do, right? It can do this extra check.
No, but I still, it still doesn't agree with the text somehow that says that whenever I receive an add proposal, I must validate the credential, but against what time?
I mean, you could say something like, so since in principle, like expiring credentials, credentials with time varying validity, it doesn't cover all credentials. You could say something here like, you could validate except for the time varying bits of it. Right, so you could validate ignoring validity or ignoring revocation until you're back in a reasonably current state.
There seems to be
I agree with Marta that it go ahead, Britta.
I was going to say that there seems to be a bigger aspect here. So going back to some of the earlier discussion on DS, I recall, I think, Raphael, you mentioned you were dealing with timestamps instead of epoch numbers for tracing the updates. And that's essentially what the issue at this is, what's going on, is that we're not associating epochs to any particular time, and therefore we can't associate the credential to a particular time, to a particular epoch for checking updates. So one solution side of this is saying, all right, we associate epochs to timestamps in some way. That's not really ideal as a generic case. There's another variant where we say we put on the DS. The DS actually has to associate some sort of timestamp to updates, so that if someone is out of time, and that's really the case Marta is looking at here, is someone's coming online after the fact and is pulling old updates. So there's some sort of timestamp associated to those epochs that they're pulling from older state, and it's a validating credential to say, is it okay at that time? But there is a weakness for putting it on the DS side because we're relying on that DS to not behave maliciously and assign a wrong timestamp. So I think we're touching on a slightly bigger problem here in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also that the committer that might be kind of malicious, right? It could also screw with the timestamps in a sense. I mean, that's just side.
So I agree, it's generally very complex. The question is, though, what you said, Marta, and I agree with it, but it's not really part of Richard's PR, the fact that the credential must be validated, right? It's something that's outside of the PR, and still incorrect. So Richard was asking if we can go ahead and merge the PR as is and then resolve it later.
Yeah, I agree with this text is kind of about sending mostly. That this makes a lot of sense, but then you have this receiving after the fact that's kind of not solved yet.
Yeah, I fully agree. But maybe if we can already get consensus on the PR. I do have one remark specifically about the PR, though. That's the third paragraph, where you say that it might be okay, and that's relatively vague. So members might remove other members. And this might be problematic if you have some sort of hierarchy and you don't have egalitarian groups anymore. This might be at odds with that.
It is the, you need to have the invalid thing noticed by someone who can make the remove. I think that's fair. I think I didn't want to go quite into that level of detail here.
Yeah, I don't have a concrete proposal. I'm just saying that this could be potentially problematic depending on how you interpret it, because it remains relatively vague. You could also interpret it in a way that you say, okay, in any case, members are allowed to do that regardless of their power level within the group. And then you have a conflict with what you just described, Richard.
I mean, that's a DS-AS issue, right? So that's kind of out of scope of the protocol document, and that would be the kind of thing that we would need to talk about in the architecture document, right?
Well, no, not exactly, because the spec here, introduces something that. So while we don't have any sort of hierarchy within the group, it seems to stipulate that it is okay that in a very specific condition, one member removes another member, regardless of anything else. I don't think that's
what they're saying. This is so the spec already says that the spec allows people to send any valid proposal, any valid commit at any time. And this is just saying, maybe one of the things you would do is issue a remove that removes the member if you detect this. So it's just saying something that you can, it's providing a remedy using permission that you already have in the MLS protocol. But then the architecture document says that, a DS and an AS have these roles, and, you can do access control lists and, moderation and blah, 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 blah on top of the MLS protocol.
Yeah, but I still see a potential for conflict here.
So what is the conflict?
So
if everybody
interpret it. So assuming you have a well-defined extension, that categorizes members into two groups, admins and non-admins are not allowed to add and remove people. And that in itself is completely sane. And then you take the third paragraph here and you interpret it in a way that it is absolutely allowed that a member removes a stale member. And that is at odds with the fact that member could be a non-admin.
I think that's very hypothetical because there's no normative language in the third paragraph. And if your extension is concerned about that, it could clarify that in the extension.
Sure, it could do that, yes.
Going back to Marta's point about accepting, so Marta, I might reframe your point as being the question of whether I, as a member, should accept a message that was signed by a member with an invalid credential. So the second paragraph here talks about that a little bit, right? So it talks about accepting updates and commits so that from invalid credentials, so that someone can update and get out of that state.
I was
wonder
also
if we might generalize that a little bit.
a little
we should
bit
do this broadly.
But I'm also talking about add proposals, for example, which contain key packages which are signed, right? And we say that we must verify that the credential is valid in a key package, in an add proposal.
Yeah, so what I was thinking was, you could say something like, you could generalize that last sentence in the second paragraph and say something like, if a client is in a state where it's processing old messages, it may choose to accept any proposal or commit issued from an expired credential. You probably want to distinguish time invalid from generally invalid. From an expired credential until it's back in a reasonably current state. And that's still pretty soft guidance, but I think it would kind of add the right caveat to the general requirements you're talking about.
Yeah, maybe that would work. I'm also a bit concerned about the previous section, which says that you must validate credentials in a bunch of cases. And now we're saying, well, not really if you're in this catch-up state. So maybe we should relax the previous section instead, saying you must validate the credential is valid, or if you're catching up, maybe you don't have to, or something like that.
I think maybe where this is getting, so I think where I came around to is that it's all about how you define validate though, right? And that's, so in the case that your application doesn't care about this expiration time, it is valid from its perspective, right? Like you could write an AS that says, I don't care about expiration time at all, and that fits within the specification in this document. So that's why I was kind of coming around to the idea that maybe this is its own document in itself that talks about certificates in a more opinionated way.
Yeah, but
right.
See, my point is that I do care about expiration though when I commit, for example, but there is only one procedure to validate, and it's executed when you send, and it's executed when you receive. So how do I implement my AS to actually have this one procedure that takes care of the expiration time, like it's saying now it's expired or now it's valid, and make it not fail when I catch up, but still reject bad credentials when I try to send? Is that making sense somehow?
Well,
I mean, it
Mark,
still seems like
there's no reason to have one
one
validation, but just have two validation rules, one for catch up and one for everything else.
Yeah, but MLS is just calling one validation rule.
But what Tom said is correct in that it doesn't define, MLS doesn't define everything that constitutes valid or invalid. And this language basically allows for you to have both, in this context, this is valid. In this context, this is valid. In addition to the things that the MLS spec says, these are definitely not valid. But all the other things, like all that other detail, there's more application layer of that validity, that stuff is left to the application and to the context.
Okay, I see.
So that second paragraph there is something, so there's two things about that I would raise some concern about. One is minor or fairly minor, where it says the members should accept update proposals and commits issued by members with invalid credentials if the credential in the update or commit is valid. And that makes some sense if we're talking about proposals in the first clause and the actual commit in the second clause. But as read, it's saying on the commit part that it's a contradictory statement that we should accept the commit if the credential is invalid, if the credential in the commit is valid. You can see where that conflict is. So there might be some refinement on wording there. As a bigger comment on this one, or on that second paragraph, I think that we're addressing this edge case or a very kind of segment in time, and that it needs to be addressed. So I think that this should apply, but we should also clarify, there needs to be an addendum here to clarify the limits on this, because we could, as taken, this paragraph does allow for something, let's say someone's compromised and their credentials revoked, and this is explicitly allowing that invalid credential to then commit a new valid credential under Alice's name, and there's nothing that stops that. So we have an allow here and a good reason to allow it, but we also need some text that says how not to extend this to other breaks.
So the allow here in this section should be scoped to invalidity due to timing issues.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm writing notes in the PR now. Like one of the notes I've got is to distinguish time invalid, I'm calling it. So like expired or revoked, maybe we include it in there, from generally invalid, like not signed by a real authority or something like that.
I think also we can add to that where with the timing invalid, there's a transition point in that validity, like a natural transition point where this applies versus something that's 10 months out of date.
And I guess the other question is, if we have, if a member finds his credential is invalid or will be soon, so will be soon is isn't an issue for this. It should issue an update or commit. But if it finds that it is actually invalid, then it could just go and do an external commit or an external proposal to go and add itself and remove its old instance. And then you don't have the Brita's validity issue at all.
I mean, you could do that, but you're still going to have Martha's issue. And so
no, because you're online at that point, right?
Everybody else
you have this.
I mean, yeah, I think you could envision some other ways to do this, but I don't think we need to enumerate all of them.
Okay, so where do we want to wrap this up somehow? It's not super clear to me what the consensus is here.
So the notes I've got here are: one, distinguish time invalid from invalid, and then the other. So I've got a note about the general issue that Martha raised about having messages that were from members whose credentials were valid when the message was sent, but then have since expired before you caught up. And the resolution I've got in my notes here is to recommend that when you're catching up, the AS may accept message credentials as valid that were sent as time invalid. Sorry. Let me just read you what I wrote. The bullet points in my note says, recommend accepting messages from members with time invalid credentials when catching up. So we might phrase that in terms of the AS or what have you, but that's the gist. Does that sound roughly correct? And obviously I'll put it into text and we can discuss some PR.
So, Richard, I know you need to drop in a little bit. Is it worth trying to have another interim like next Friday? Do you think there's enough here?
I could do that, and I hope we're going to be able to finish up sooner than that, but we may still have stuff to chew on then, especially on the architecture. So why don't we go ahead and
So if
book
we
it?
were to do,
We can.
if we were to go next Friday from like the same time from 10 to 12 at Eastern.
Do you mean next Friday or next Thursday?
Next Friday, actually, because I think it's got to be a week.
Okay.
It'd also be nice if we did it on Friday, then maybe we could get Paul. I don't know. I don't know when they start the clock for a week is my concern. So they might be like, it should have been done Wednesday. So that's why I said Friday.
Yeah.
Sorry, one last question regarding this PR. So the consent was to merge this PR, and you were going to do a follow-up with Marta to review. That sound right?
So
I think I can take a stab at the text I just described. And we'll see if that works, and then if not, then we can revert it and merge this and do it as following.
Cool. I also said expired but otherwise valid credentials would be another way of saying, making this little,
Right. That sounds good. All right. Thanks. So Sean, do you want to move us on to another doc?
Yeah, I think it's we'll go ahead and do that. I will go ahead and throw an interim in for next Friday, this afternoon, just in case we need it. We can always cancel it if not. And again, I thank the people that get up early or stay up late to do that. So the question now is, we don't have Benjamin on the call unless he slipped in here to talk about the architecture draft. But I do think it's worth at least looking at the pull requests that are here, because some of these are getting a little long in the tooth, because I know Rowan put a bunch of these in over time. Is there any like grand objection to any of the other proposals as they've been put forward? But I guess I'd kind of, I don't want to go through them individually, but like, are there any of these that other people have read and they're like, no, this is something that we should talk about because we do have Rowan here? Has anybody read them? I guess the other way to put it.
I read some
a
of
long
them
time ago
when they were issued, but yeah, it's been a while.
Okay, so I'm hoping if you guys could take a chance to review this, because again, like I'm very concerned that if we don't, I want to pass documents forward that don't have outstanding PRs, and Rowan did put some of these in, I think, during working group last call, so we do need to make sure that they get addressed. And if they're open issues and we try to give it to the ISG, they're going to be all over us. So we need to make sure that we review these. So if you guys could spend some time reviewing them, and if there's any suggestions or changes that need to be made, that'd be great. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to do much more than on this document than that to get people to review. And if you think they're fine, thumbs up is really the best way forward, right? And to go from there. And I know that the Paul's AD review of the architecture document is basically being worked. That's why there's a bunch of issues in the document that Benjamin's going to get to. And I'm hoping maybe switching to Friday, we might also be able to get him to go through any of those that are contentious.
Yeah, and I'm just going to point out one other thing, which is there were at least 3 issues that Paul brought up on the protocol document that were addressed by changes that I put in the PRs. They were like,
that was good.
Well, what's with this? And it's like, well, here's a section in this unmerged PR that deals with that issue that you commented on, right?
So it was actually funny because when Paul was doing that, he's like, yeah, you can send me the document even with outstanding PRs. And I was like, make sure to read those when you're doing your comments. And I guess he just missed those. So I don't know. It's kind of nice to see that we were ready to go basically. However, since we do have other people, we can switch to the other documents to talk about extensions, I guess, or federation, whichever you kind of prefer. So do we have?
Could we just look at? Is there somebody who can click the button if we agree on there's the only issue here that I think is controversial is I think once the PR 117 where there were several comments on this. But the rest of them, there were, you know, minimal comments, and in some of the cases they were just like, yeah, like I changed, you know, I fixed the you know, the references for the security analysis, right? It's like there's no like, I don't think anyone is going to have any objection to those, but this one is the one that probably needs some attention.
So to answer your specific question, I have the power to press all the buttons and make everything happen. I've typically kind of left that to the author. So I'm hoping that when he gets to this other stuff, he'll do it. And if he doesn't, then I can press buttons. So I'm going to try to see if we can leave it to get those done when he's going through the AD review comments, as opposed to kind of overriding it. But if it goes any longer, then yeah, I'm going to, because these are kind of old. Okay. But yeah, let's go through this one because I see there's some comments in here from Brendan. I don't know if you want to jump on there, Brendan, and let us know.
So, I mean, the problem is that these are just so old. But I'm trying to remember the argument here. We have a policy on Cypher suites and extensions, which doesn't necessarily make sense to me because these are negotiated. So if you don't want to do something, then you would just not have support for it and it would not be negotiated. And Rohan brings up that there may be compliance aspects. So like FIPS, if you require a certain thing. So that would be a policy, but I'm not sure.
So yeah, so the distinction that I wanted to make is the difference between I have an implementation which can do, you know, all 7 Cypher suites or 5 of the 7 Cypher suites, but then in a particular deployment, I have a policy that says that I'm only using FIPS Cypher suites, or I'm only using Cypher suites that don't include the, you know, the NIST elliptic curves. Right, that second part is a policy decision as opposed to I implemented this longer list of Cypher suites.
Yeah, I guess it just feels a little bit random to me that you would have like the DS or some sort of outside entity being like the group has to work this way. So I guess I'm curious what other people think if, you know, since we do negotiate it.
So you would still, so let's say that the list of acceptable Cypher suites was, you know, 3 out of the 5 implemented Cypher suites, then you would still negotiate among those 3. You're not getting rid of your negotiation mechanism. You're just, it's like what we do in TLS today, where I can go and configure my server where I say, okay, the Cypher suite list, here's the Cypher suite list of among the ones that are supported by OpenSSL, where I've pared down the list to only support these. And then of those, then you negotiate.
It's like mostly a secondary safety check, and I don't see anything wrong with having extra safety check on the policy. In case there's some loophole that a certain implementation manages to find where negotiation gets them around this.
Would that count as sort of an interoperability concern though?
I mean, if you're setting up a policy, presumably you're setting it up in a consistent, it's your responsibility when you make a policy to do it in a consistent way for your context. So if my context is I'm doing it for Mimi, then interoperability is a strong consideration, and I want to make sure that I have the broadest interoperability possible in the instant messaging context. If I'm doing one for, you know, government, intergovernment, private network things, then I'm going to have a different set of interoperability concerns there. And I need to make sure that my policy is self-consistent with that.
So what is a place where I would negotiate something that would be a violation of the policy if I could also just not support it?
Sorry. So if I'm not sure I completely understood what you meant, but like if I was taking the case of Cypher Suites, if I had an implementation that can do all 7 Cypher Suites, and my policy said I don't allow Cypher Suites that do cha-cha poly, then the negotiation would occur using the 5 Cypher Suites that don't contain cha-cha poly.
Well, yeah, so that's just me not supporting those.
No, it's a policy saying that in this context, I will not allow the negotiation of cha-cha poly Cypher Suites.
But
This
then
might be something
it shouldn't be
to-
supported in the key packages. That's where we negotiate that. Why do you need a second step of negotiation?
No, the policy is I'm not going to ever give you, I mean, I'm not going to, in this context, I'm not going to allow the usage of those. Now, you could go and send me a key package that contains cha-cha poly. I'm going to say, that's great. Thanks. I'm not going to hand this out to anybody, or I'm not going to use this. None of my clients are going to use this key package. If you also had other key packages that were with other Cypher Suites, then those would get used.
This could occur if you have, say, a messaging implementation that is supported in either various companies, or a person has a private version on an application as well as a company version. And so what they support in that negotiation is everything in your implementation. So you have this list of, say, 5 Cypher Suites, but company policy only allows you to use one of, say, 2 of these. So when you are in groups inside that company, you not only have to negotiate and satisfy this policy, but when you are on your private chat, you might negotiate and you don't need to satisfy that policy. So it's like an extra layer of check.
Yeah, I understand that part, but in very practical terms, like the end bit of the negotiation is done by the group creator who decides on the Cypher Suite. So in that specific case, that's exactly when the company policy would interfere with that and say you cannot create a group without Cypher Suite. It's
Right.
not
So
something
I'm
that's ever enforced after that. And the context is
this is just
a bit
the
strange
policy
because you're an
telling the
outsider
client,
and you
that.
can create. Sorry?
We're not disagreeing. I'm just saying that the policy the policy is telling you so the clients know this, and also so they don't waste time, like in this context, maybe generating hundreds of key packages for Cypher Suites that are not going to get used in this context.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird that, you know, in that particular constructed example that you know, an outsider to the company, obviously, with a misbehaving client can create a group that then belongs to the company. Maybe the example is not the best one to clarify what you're after.
Okay. I guess I'm not seeing why this seems so unusual to people. I mean, we do TLS implementations do this all the time, right? We have an implementation that does this big list. We have a policy that says we're going to do this. These are allowed, and then we negotiate something inside of the subset of the intersection of those 2 lists, right? In this case, the fact that you have a policy, it doesn't mean that we have defined a protocol mechanism for conveying that policy. It just means that that policy exists and is somehow configured across the MLS, you know, scope of implementations that are participating. So, like when you say, but you know, but somebody who goes to create a group, they're going to, at the time, they're only going to go and add users that comply with the policy. It's like, yes, they're only going to comply with the policy. How did they find out about the policy? You needed to have a policy. And so that all this is saying is that, yes, this is one of the things this is one of the policy considerations that you need to put into consideration. And this is exactly what Paul asked for. He asked for an enumeration of things that are policy considerations. That's what this section is for. And so listing these things, like the fact that you also do a negotiation among the things that are specified in the policy, that is the protocol of concern. But in terms of operational consideration sections, or operational considerations, this section is supposed to enumerate all kinds of things that one might need to keep into consideration in order to run a network.
Yeah, okay. No, I mean, I think fundamentally I agree with you. It's the example that I didn't agree with, but I can see where this is needed when you actually generate key packages, because clients need to know what Cypher suites to include besides the one that they actually cryptographically support. So that's exactly the point where you were saying clients need to know about the policy. It's not when creating the group, that's probably way too late. It is when you generate the key packages and upload them. So yeah, now that we have a better example, I think I agree with that, yes.
Yeah, so I guess my objection to this so far has been that I've been trying to keep this list just to what are interoperability requirements in a pretty pure sense, like just what is going to help the group work together, assuming that there's not like some sort of outside issue. Like part of this is that you are putting it in the context of being like in a corporation, and maybe the corporation requires FIPS. And so that seems sort of like an outside concern to me, where the corporation can enforce basically any requirement that it wants. But I can see if this is a common enough concern that we could reasonably include it. But does that make sense as well, what I'm saying? Basically that.
Yeah, I think we just disagreed about what this was useful for. And I think that the thing that I am thinking that this section is useful for is exactly the kinds of things that, Paul asked, well, what about this? And we say, yeah, here in this section, it says, like he was asking for exactly this kind of thing. And that's why I wanted this to be as inclusive as possible in the broader sense, and not just in the protocol interoperability sense.
Okay. So moving on to, I think, line 832, there's sort of a similar issue where the line is a policy of when members should commit pending proposals in the group. So this is already discussed in the protocol document, basically saying that there are some rules that you have to send a commit if you want to send an application message, and there are uncommitted proposals. And to the extent that it's not specified in the protocol doc, it's also not necessary for interop in that sort of pure sense that I was talking about.
Yeah, in the same kind of way, if you're concerned that you have a network set up where you have a lot of very large groups, you have groups of 10,000, 100,000 members, then you don't want every member to commit every pending proposal, to try to commit every pending proposal immediately all at the same time. And so having a policy of like, this is the order in which, this is who should try to commit pending proposals immediately, and this is who should wait. The other thing is if nobody, maybe you have the opposite problem, which is you want pending proposals to be committed promptly because you're also supporting external commits. And in that case, you you don't want all the clients that are not sending anything to just sit around and say, oh, not my problem, I'm going to wait for somebody else to commit. So in aggregate, this creates a problem for the network unless everybody knows kind of what is the network administrator trying to accomplish in this environment.
So I agree with that, but the example you just gave is a little bit broader than what you wrote up. You only said, when to commit, but in the example you gave, you said, who should commit. So if anything, you should also include that, I guess.
Well, when a member should commit, it depends on who you are. If you want to change the wording, I'm fine with that, but.
I agree that technically this could be implied, yes. Okay. Sure. It depends on how much burden you want to put on the reader here. If you want to be very explicit about what you mean, or if you want people to guess what it could also mean.
So if somebody wants to send some, anyone wants to propose an alternate phrasing of this, feel free. But I think everybody understands what I meant at this point.
Yeah, I understand, and that also seems reasonable to me now.
Okay. Brendan, I think your next comment was on line 833. How to share group info objects needed for external joins.
Yeah, because there's a mechanism for that. It's not, I think you put it here as a policy, but we have basically like a generic unspecified mechanism for sharing the group info.
What is the generic mechanism for sharing group info? We have a structure, but we don't have there's not like a protocol.
Well, no, that's why it's unspecified, is we have this line 776, which I don't see it here, but I assume that it just says, you need a way to share the group info. And so if you want it to be encrypted or to be protected in some specific way, that would just be part of the generic way that it's shared.
Okay. So I guess the only thing that I would be concerned about
there must be a way to upload a group info. Sorry, go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, so it'd be if you're there's nothing in there about I don't see anything about how you fetch it necessarily. But the sort of the policy aspect that I was concerned about is basically, in our environment, the DS is distributed across domains, and so sharing this group info, we want to do sort of an additional end-to-middle encryption in some cases to make sure that the group info isn't shared with intermediate servers which are part of the same DS.
And
I agree. It's not a dupe of line 776.
Well, I was going to say, you don't feel that the concern that the group info is handled a specific way isn't addressed just by the design and implementation of the mechanism for sharing the group info?
So I would think of 777, the other line, as being like, I would write up, this is the REST endpoint that you use for accessing the group info, and I might have the ability to upload it and fetch it unencrypted or encrypted, and then the policy would be, do I require that it has to be encrypted in this context?
Okay.
I think you can think of it in a two-step process, because the way I understand it, 776 is about making it available to the DS. But then the question is, how does the DS make it available to potential new joiners, where you might have an access control situation that has nothing to do with the way you uploaded it initially. It might be disjoint.
Okay.
Yeah, I think again, I think the design of the mechanism that you're doing that could potentially handle some of the policy concerns, but I think it's also fine to split it out into a policy.
Okay.
Okay. I think that's it. So I think what I'm going to do is I'll note in the PR that we discussed this. Interim seemed IE in its ready version. All right. We got 4 minutes left. What do we think we should go to next?
There's a question in 118 about making sure to use basic credential correctly or securely. And I'm curious if people intend to actually use basic credential in production, or if this is just a testing thing. Oh, Sean left.
What was the last decision on the next interim next Friday? Are we going to do it or not?
Something weird happened.
Yes, I think we are going to do it.
I'm going to go ahead and send out a request for it. So we should know by tomorrow whether it's been approved. But I was going to go ahead and schedule it from 10 to 12 on Friday Eastern. So the same time frame, just next Friday.
Can you actually reach out to Benjamin and try to make sure that time works for him?
Yeah, I will. I'll reach out. I know that this time conflicts, I think, with an internal meeting they have. So hopefully Friday will be better. And I'll try to spur him to actually make the meeting. So I'm sorry, I got clipped there. You said that there was a question about 118, Brendan, before I.
Yeah,
so I
Brendan
just asked
credentials.
to use basic credentials in production.
So on our side, not right now, but it's maybe not excluded. Don't know. It's not a very helpful answer, I guess.
Our proof of concepts that we, basically went to beta with is, we shipped something to a customer that uses basic credential. Can't say that I'm proud of that, but then the version that they're planning to go to production with is going to have credentials, real credentials.
Is there sorry, just clearing my throat there. Is there any harm in actually just saying that basic is for test? To like really clarify it. I mean, they've done that before, right? Where they had like null cipher suites and it's like, hey, don't use these for production. This is just for test. Could we do the same thing here to make it really clear that it shouldn't really be used in production?
Tom and Marta?
Yeah, that was my assumption, that basic credential was test only.
No. We don't want to. No.
Yeah, we're not using basic credential for anything. I think that's for sure.
So the only place where I could see this being used is in a scenario where you don't care about interrupt to start with, and things are fairly minimal. I think Richard said that earlier on, like Signal protocol doesn't have a concept of credentials as such. And so if we want MLS to replace the Signal protocol in some of the setups, then it might make sense to have that. That being said, it doesn't have to be in the spec like that. It could also, be an extension. Because we have the IANA thing there, so we can put that in the extension doc. Because it's going to be niche. It's either testing or obscure setups.
Yeah, I think that I just wonder whether we should have like a big warning, like, you know, with TLS with 0RTT, there's like pages on like it's replayable. Don't do it unless you do certain things. Maybe we should bolster the text here to make it a little, not to say that it's specifically used for test, but that, you know, there are dragons here, like, and maybe, you know, like warning or whatever, like putting things in quotes might be a way to do it. I mean, again, then again, the recommendation is here, so like that's pretty clear.
But how do folks feel about moving it to the extensions doc if it's, you know, not going to be relevant in production for most people?
To moving basic to the
That's why we did the extension doc. Yes.
I mean, so if somebody,
along with a big warning.
I mean, so somebody does basic using out of band identity verification in a private network. Is there harm? Right.
No, that was my point. So these obscure scenarios might exist, but they're not interop scenarios, and therefore it might be fine to, you know, for it to be an extension that people use in private setups. That was my point.
I guess I was thinking that in this case, you could have an MLS client that's, you know, or at least like an MLS stack that implements basic, that just implements the base protocol that works with, say, I don't know, Ring Central's implementation that uses out of band, you know, out of band verification, identity verification. That doesn't seem such
sure. Sorry, just one remark regarding moving to the extension doc. I don't think that's a great idea because we need it for interop. So it should stay in the spec, if only for testing. And also, yeah, I think we should let it in there and just leave it in there because, as Raphael said, there are some scenarios that people might want to use it in as like a really, really basic, essentially non-existent AS, which might be useful in some cases, but we should add like recommendations on how to use it properly, as we wanted to do anyway with the whole discussion on the basic credential, which is not completed, I think. Also, I mean, yeah. I mean, we're over time now, so maybe we should just delegate this discussion to the discussion next time when we discuss basic
postpone it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, cool. So we'll do that. I'll send out a meeting request. Thanks all again. Thank you very much, Conrad, for taking notes, and we'll see y'all next week. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
No worries. See you, everyone.